Have you ever had that neighbor who thinks other people's backyards are some sort of self-service gallery? You know, the type who looks at your barbecue and asks if they can borrow the meat you've already seasoned? Now imagine that level of audacity, but squared, wearing thongs, speaking loudly in the middle of the street, and always clutching a can of beer. There you go, you've pictured my neighbor Karen. Not just any Karen, a bogan Karen. For those who grew up in Australia, you know the term bogan isn't thrown around lightly. It's that complete package of ignorance with a sense of divine entitlement. And the Karen from down the street doesn't disappoint. She's the kind of person who thinks the noise from a chicken is more bothersome than a fight in the middle of the night, who believes that if a tree grows and exceeds 1 centimeter over the fence, she now has the right to decide what to do with it. A diplomat of ignorance, if I can call her that. It all started almost innocently. I was stacking firewood in my backyard. Simple. Just that. Firewood. Cut wood. Stacked on my side of the fence. On my property. Karen appeared out of nowhere, as if she had a radar to detect any movement of other people's productivity, and immediately said, "Wow, you've got quite a bit of firewood there, haven't you?" And I, still trying to maintain the cordiality the neighborhood demands, replied with a toothless smile, "Yeah, I'm getting ready for winter. You know how it is." She laughed, in that way where you can't tell if it's mockery, flirting, or a threat, and left. But in the following days, pieces of the pile started to disappear. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Then, I thought maybe I had used more than I remembered. Until one day, I noticed a trail of wood chips leading from my fence straight into her yard. Mate, when I say Karen stole my firewood, I'm not exaggerating. She literally stole the firewood from my backyard, as if she was picking up mangoes in a public square. I thought it was an isolated incident, an emergency. Maybe her stove broke, or the cat was cold. But no. Days later, I saw her with her partner at the back of the yard, lighting a fire with my firewood, as if it were nothing. And right then, it became clear. If you live near a bogan Karen, even your firewood needs insurance against home theft. The good news? I'm not the type who stays silent. And if there's one thing I've learned living around here, it's that the Australian fauna is full of unexpected allies. After the first theft of firewood, and let's call it what it is, because borrowing without asking is just a lazy way of saying theft, I decided to observe more closely. I started paying attention to every detail of Karen's behavior, and that's when I realized the problem wasn't just the firewood. The firewood was just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg, the bait on the hook of chaos. Let's start with the setting, because every good tale needs a stage. I live in one of those typical Australian suburbs, where each house has its own little space, a decent backyard, a wooden fence separating the properties, and a neighborhood that, most of the time, just wants to live in peace. We have galas squawking in the morning, magpies eyeing cyclists in spring, and that constant smell of eucalyptus that makes it feel like nature is always watching you. It's peaceful, or it was, until Karen moved in. She showed up at the house next door after the previous resident, a retired gentleman named Graham, decided to sell and move to the Gold Coast. Bags packed, contract signed, and in the blink of an eye, there she was. The first warning sign? The move. No one who arrives with a ute full of beer boxes and a giant barbecue in front of the couch should inspire confidence. But that's all right. No one here is prejudiced. We give the benefit of the doubt. In the first few days, Karen even seemed normal. Disguised, I would say. A good morning here. A need a hand there. And that forced friendliness that sounds more like a passive-aggressive threat than kindness. But the mask fell off quickly. Very quickly. First came the rubbish issue. She started throwing hers in my bin. I thought it was an accident. Then, I saw with my own eyes, she waited for the collection to pass, and when my bin came back empty, she would sneak over, lift the lid, and shove 2 massive bags inside. Did I confront her? Of course I did. And she responded with the classic, "Oh, I thought we could share since we're neighbors." Of course, Karen. Share the space, the patience, the nerves, the air, and now the rubbish. Then came the hose incident. One day I went to water the plants and noticed the water pressure was weird. I followed the hose and, surprise, it was stretched over the fence, into her yard, watering her garden, with my water, without a hint of shame. When I questioned her, she said, "But your grass is green. I thought you weren't using it." All of this would have been enough to make anyone lose faith in human coexistence. But no, Karen went further. She started eyeing my firewood pile with an unsettling frequency. You could see her eyes shining. It wasn't a shine of admiration. It was greed, desire. It was as if she saw money stacked up. And in a way, in the Australian winter, firewood is worth almost as much as gold, especially if you don't want to freeze while watching TV in the living room. The first time I realized the pile had shrunk, I still tried to rationalize it. I must have burned more than I thought. Then I saw footprints in the wet soil. Footprints with the sole of those old thongs she always wears. Footprints that ended at a hole in the fence. Yes, she had made a hole, small, discreet, hidden behind some plants, but enough to reach an arm through, grab the wood, and pull it. That's where things started to change. I was no longer just dealing with an annoying neighbor. I was facing a sneaky, smiling, barefoot enemy, a kind of thief who robs while looking you in the eye the next day, as if nothing had happened, and then offers you a warm beer, thinking that makes up for it. Karen became the name of my headache. And the most curious thing, she never asked, never inquired, just took. Because in her mind, everything within arm's reach is automatically shareable. The backyard, free territory. The hose, community property. The firewood? Ah, the firewood. It was almost like a gift from nature, left there for anyone who needed it most. And who needed it most? She did, of course. In the logic of a bogan Karen, the whole world is her backyard. After everything that happened with the firewood, the fence, the hose, and the rubbish, I found myself forced to try to understand. No, not justify, but at least comprehend where this behavior came from. How does someone get to this level of cluelessness? And that's when it hit me. Karen is not an accident. She follows her own logic, a kind of unwritten manual, perhaps passed down through generations of bogan, where the first commandment is clear. If it's within sight, then it's mine. This life philosophy is what sustains the particular world in which she lives. A world where limit is an offensive word, privacy is a bourgeois concept, and respect is something that only matters when she feels disrespected, which, let's face it, happens every time someone dares to say no. And the most fascinating, or irritating depending on your level of patience thing, is that she genuinely believes she is right. Karen doesn't steal in her mind, she claims, and this goes far beyond the firewood. For instance, there's the case of the neighbor's hammock. He installed a new hammock, one of those relaxation types between two trees, a beautiful navy blue fabric hammock that even looked comfortable. It only took 2 sunny days for Karen to appear lying in it, as if she were at a resort. When the owner arrived, confused, she looked at him and said, "Oh, I thought it was for common use. It's on the front lawn, isn't it?" "Of course, Karen. And if I park my van in your garden, that's all good too." Or the case of the barbecue. One Saturday afternoon, the neighbor from the other corner had a barbecue and, at the end of the event, left the barbecue cooling in the backyard. On Sunday morning, Karen shows up with the barbecue pushed up to her side of the fence. When confronted, she replied, "You guys finished using it, right? I thought you'd left it for the rubbish." This logic of, if it's not locked, it's mine, is practically a lifestyle. And the scariest part? She is completely immune to embarrassment. Any ordinary person would turn red, apologize, return what they took, and try to avoid exposure. Karen? No. She raises the stakes, responds with irony, laughs in the person's face, shifts the blame back. Once I caught her picking passion fruits from the neighbor's fence. The fence, by the way, was entirely surrounded by wire, clearly delineating space, and there she was, with a shopping bag full of someone else's fruit. When the neighbor appeared, incredulous, Karen responded, "But the plant is invading my side. The fruit is in my air." My air. That's a new one. Karen is now claiming rights over the oxygen that touches the neighbor's fruit. And this is not just funny. It's dangerous, because people like this respect nothing. Not social rules, not physical boundaries, nor basic notions of coexistence. And when you start to ignore this behavior, it grows, it becomes routine, it turns into permission. That's when I realized, if I did nothing, if I let it slide, Karen would continue expanding her territory like an empire. Today, it's the firewood. Tomorrow, it's the lawnmower. Next week, maybe it'll be my garage. Who knows? Maybe even my house. If I let her, she'd rent out my guest room on Airbnb without me knowing. The conclusion? Dealing with a Karen requires more than common sense. It requires strategy. She lives in a world where the only thing that imposes respect is fear, and that's when I knew what I needed to do. Because if she acts as if everything is hers, I needed to show that not everything that glitters is firewood. Sometimes, it's an angry ant nest. The decision was made on a hot afternoon, as I looked once again at the visibly smaller pile of firewood than the previous week. I could have confronted Karen again. I could have called the police. I could even have installed a sound alarm that played Men at Work every time someone jumped the fence. But no, I wanted something more emblematic, something that taught, that educated, that tattooed the lesson into her subconscious with the subtlety of a mosquito air raid in summer. And then I remembered a documentary I had watched about the wonders, or rather horrors, of the Australian animal kingdom. Among snakes, spiders, toxic frogs, and aggressive birds, one group stood out in my memory: bull ants. If you're not familiar with them, let me paint the scene. The Myrmecia gullosa, affectionately known as bull ants, are robust, aggressive creatures, with jaws that look like they were made to cause psychological trauma. They don't just sting, they throw themselves at you with the confidence of a hungry crocodile and the temperament of an annoyed pub bouncer. And the best part? They are native, a gift from Mother Australia. The idea hit me like a bolt of lightning. If Karen loved taking my firewood, why not offer her some special logs? The execution of the plan required patience. First, I chose a few hollow logs from the back of the pile, the kind that at first glance seem solid, but inside have enough space to hide secrets. I took 4 of them. I bought pure beeswax at an organic market, under the pretense of making handmade candles if anyone asked. And the hardest part? Getting the ants. I knew that in the park, about 2 kilometers from home, there was a known nest of bull ants. I set out on the expedition with all the caution in the world. I wore thick gloves, tucked my pants into my socks, put on a long-sleeved shirt, and a ridiculous hat that seemed more suitable for a beekeeping convention. I took a large jar with small holes and a garden trowel. Every movement was calculated. I wanted about 20 or 30 ants in each log, enough to cause chaos, but not enough to get reported in the local paper. After collecting the troops, I carefully brought the ants home and, one by one, settled the warriors inside the hollow logs. It was almost poetic, each one entering its new home, unaware they would be part of a moral lesson. I used wax to seal the openings and then glued pieces of tree bark to disguise them. The result? Perfect logs, indistinguishable from the others, apparently harmless. But inside, a party of rage and jaws. I placed the sabotaged logs at the bottom of the pile, where Karen usually chose. She never took the ones from the front. She always reached in with the casualness of someone in a supermarket trying to pick the ripest mango. I knew she would end up grabbing those. Throughout the whole process, the feeling was strange. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't revenge in the classic sense. It was more like a performance, an interactive art installation about the limits of property, featuring a special appearance from the Australian fauna. I didn't want to hurt anyone, just to teach. And let's be honest, if you take something that isn't yours and bring it to your backyard, what happens next is, technically, a consequence. I admit that the night before the execution, I was a bit apprehensive. What if she noticed? What if it didn't work? What if an ant decided to turn back and make a nest in my shed? But then I remembered, this was a calculated risk, a reminder that sometimes justice needs 6 legs and antennas. The next morning, I sat on the porch with my coffee, like a wise old man watching the sunrise and waiting for the events of fate to unfold. I knew it wouldn't take more than a few hours. She was predictable. The kind of person who can't see a new piece of firewood without wanting to steal a bit of someone else's heat. I had planted the seeds of chaos. Now it was just waiting for the harvest. The sun had barely passed the roofline when she appeared. Karen, in all her glory, slippers dragging, sweat shorts that should have retired in 2007, and that barbecue sauce-stained shirt with the faded "Keep calm and drink beer" slogan on the back. She looked around as if she thought she was being discreet, not realizing she had the same level of subtlety as a kangaroo in a bowling alley. That casually guilty walk that only works for those who still believe others are idiots. I was already on the porch, coffee cup in hand, sunglasses on, pretending to look at the sky. Inside, it felt like I was in the audience of a theater, and the show was about to begin. Karen crossed over to the fence, as she always did. She crouched down, slipped her arm through the opening she had made, and began to feel around. I even found it amusing to see how careful she was not to be seen, considering the performance was worthy of a hidden camera show on Australian TV. And then she grabbed it. One log, then another, and another. 3 hollow logs sealed with furious ants. My masterpiece. My gift wrapped in eucalyptus bark. She tossed the logs onto a noisy wheelbarrow, the kind that creaks from the inside. She returned to her backyard with the lightness of someone who just saved $40 on someone else's firewood. I could barely contain my smile. It was now. It was now. The next few minutes were pure poetry. From my privileged vantage point, I could see everything. She unloaded the logs next to the old barbecue. She was preparing Sunday morning's cook-up. Quite a bogan thing, I must say. She picked up one of the logs, placed it on the grill with paper and kindling underneath. The first spark rose. The smoke danced in the air. And then, chaos ensued. It was like triggering an Indiana Jones trap. First, she got a slap on the arm. Not a human slap, but a sharp sting from a bull ant. The first one. The pioneer. Then came a flurry of bites. A surge of fury with legs and jaws. They poured out from the crevices, from the holes, from the depths of the logs. Within seconds, the firewood turned into a moving ant nest, with a clear destination, Karen. She dropped the wood with a scream that, honestly, I had only heard before when a possum fell off the roof. She smacked her own arms, jumped, spun around, shook her shirt as if it were on fire. One slipper flew off in one direction, the beer in another. The grill fell to the ground. One of the dogs barked and ran inside. I, from the porch, maintained my composure, serious, controlled. But inside, I was drowning in a waterfall of laughter. Poetic justice had never been so literal. She flailed for nearly 2 minutes, running in circles, trying to get the ants off her skin, hair, armpits, until she decided to throw herself into the kids' plastic pool. Plop. A desperate dive, followed by gasping breaths and a stream of swear words that would make a dock worker blush. And you know what's even more curious? At no point did she shout, "Why is this happening to me?" No, she knew. Instinctively, she knew. Because only someone who deep down knows they shouldn't have touched that firewood gets that scared of ants. Minutes later, her partner appeared outside, wearing a band t-shirt and partially wet mullet. He came to see what was happening. She, still in the pool, was pointing an accusing finger at the firewood thrown on the ground, shouting things like, "They were in there, in the wood, those damn hell ants." He, like every good pragmatic bogan, just replied, "Oh, but didn't you take it from the neighbor's yard?" Dramatic pause. Silence. And then, she murmured, as if admitting to a war crime, "I did, but he wasn't going to know." Ah, Karen. But I knew. And in that moment, as she got out of the pool, wet, with disheveled hair and her pride in tatters, I was certain of one thing. The lesson had been taught, and taught in the most Australian way possible. Not with shouting, not with fights, not with police reports, but with the help of the native fauna, which knows exactly how to deal with invaders. That night, Karen didn't show up. No movement in the yard, no sounds of barbecues or thongs. The silence was comforting, peace restored. And me? Well, I slept like a baby, wrapped in the sweet feeling of justice served the local way, the Australian way. It was obvious. It was predictable. If there's one thing as certain as the sunrise in the Australian desert, it's this. A Karen never admits she was wrong. Never. The morning after the ant attack, silence hung in the air. That kind of silence that isn't just the absence of sound. It's the harbinger of something coming in sideways. And it came. Soon after midday, when the heat was already starting to melt thoughts, I heard the most dreaded sound for anyone who just wants to live in peace. Firm knocks on the front gate. I opened slowly. There she was, still with red marks on her arms, a poorly stuck bandage on her leg, and an expression that mixed outrage, indignation, and that look of, "You will pay for this." Next to her, her partner, who looked like he had been dragged into the situation, holding a can of beer as if it were his emotional shield. Without greeting me, she fired, "You sabotaged your firewood, didn't you?" The phrase came out spat, as if she had been holding on to it all night. And you know what? I didn't even have time to respond, because she continued, with the moral authority of someone who has never been wrong in her life. "You put something in there. Ants. My arm is swollen. I had to go to the medical center. Look at this." And she stretched her arm out, as if showing the result of her own guilt would incriminate me. The urge to laugh was strong, but I maintained the character of the peaceful citizen. I looked serious, with a hint of calculated surprise. But hang on, Karen. You took firewood from my yard? Silence. Short, but sufficient. She hesitated. Her partner turned his face to hide the expression of, "This is going to end badly." But she insisted, composing herself with that pose of someone about to cite the law. "I took it because there was plenty. You have heaps, and firewood isn't dangerous. You put ants in the wood, that's premeditated. That's environmental terrorism." Environmental terrorism, yes, she said that. By this point, I was more curious than irritated. I wanted to see how far she would go. "Karen, are you saying you took firewood without permission, and now you're angry because you didn't like the contents? Is that it?" She crossed her arms, looked away, and murmured, "You didn't have to exaggerate." And there it was, the heart of the Karen drama. She never errs. She is always the victim. The narrative, in her mind, was clear. I had provoked a deliberate attack, and she was just trying to make use of something that was going to be wasted. She even had the audacity to say, "If you didn't want anyone to take it, you should have put up a sign." I, with the self-control of a Tibetan monk, took a deep breath and said, "Karen, I didn't know I needed to put up signs to remind people that what's in my yard isn't community freebie." She looked at me as if I were the villain of the story. And then came the final blow. She threatened to call the police. This is indirect aggression. It's an attack on home security. The police. She wanted to call the police because she messed with what she shouldn't have and didn't like what she found. The irony of that could fuel an entire series of satires. I smiled. "Go ahead, Karen. Just don't forget to tell them that you trespassed onto private property to take something that wasn't yours." She huffed, turned around, and stormed off, leaving a trail of frustration and wounded pride on the pavement. She never spoke to me directly after that. But she began to walk down the street as if she were a martyr, the woman who almost died attacked by armed firewood. And of course, she spread to the neighborhood that I was a dangerous guy, kind of crazy, who messes with strange creatures. Reinventing herself as a victim is Karen's final art form, and she is an artist. After the ant scandal, the failed attempt to turn her own guilt into a police case, and the even more pathetic attempt to portray herself as a victim of ecological terrorism, Karen finally toned it down. Not that she changed, Karen never changes, but she started keeping a safe distance from my fence. I don't know if it was fear, shame, or just an allergy to native insects with a sense of justice, but the important thing is that peace reigned again in the block. And that's where the beauty lies. Well-executed revenge doesn't need shouting, fighting, or police reports. It just needs creativity, patience, and a bit of collaboration from the local biodiversity. Because, you see, when you live in a country where even the lawn can sting you, learning to respect other people's space isn't just good manners, it's a survival instinct. Now, every time I see Karen passing on the pavement, she makes a subtle detour. She doesn't look me in the eye. She doesn't give that fake wave she used to. Sometimes she even crosses the street. And you know what? That's just fine. Every step back she takes is a silent reminder that, sooner or later, karma comes back. And sometimes, it comes back with 6 legs and a bite you won't forget. This story taught me a few things. First, always be suspicious of those who treat what belongs to others as common use. These people don't want equality. They want convenience. They want what you have, without the effort you put in. And worst of all, they think they have a right to it. Secondly, bull ants are undoubtedly the most underappreciated security agents of the Australian fauna. They need more recognition. Perhaps a statue, a bust, a banner at the opening of Parliament. Here we respect the Myrmecia. Thirdly, and maybe most importantly, sometimes protecting what's yours means teaching a lesson that goes beyond "don't touch," a lesson that says, if you want to play, you'll have to accept the rules of the game. And in my game, every log has its surprise. The best part? I received more messages from the neighbors than ever. Some gave me pats on the back. Others asked where I got the ants. One even asked if I take custom orders for logs for invasive mothers-in-law. That's when I realized Karen may have thought she was the victim, but deep down, she became the example, the warning, the case study. And before anyone comes along to say I went too far, remember, everything she received was a direct result of her choices. She dug her own hole, or in this case, she opened her own gate and pulled, with all her might, her lesson in humility. At the end of the day, what this story shows is simple. Respecting others' space is a basic rule of coexistence. When a person ignores this, when they think they can appropriate everything they see, they are just asking reality to remind them that the world doesn't revolve around their own belly button. And sometimes, that reminder comes in the form of itching, burning, and a good dip in an inflatable pool. So if you've also had a cheeky neighbor, a backyard Karen, a relative with sticky fingers, or a coworker who takes your food from the fridge without asking, leave it in the comment. Tell me what the most absurd theft you've ever seen was, and what revenge you'd love to enact. And of course, if you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you don't miss the next tales of instant karma, and leave that like, because even the like button can be stolen if Karen finds out where it is. Here, justice is served with irony, an Australian accent, and a bit of natural venom.